Hi everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us for this month's Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force meeting. This is Rebecca King with the National Housing Conference. I'm joined by Caitlin Snyder and Ethan Handelman, also with NHC. We have a great presentation for you with two speakers today, with John White, who's the Senior VP of Business Strategy at Rebuilding Together, and Steve Helmer, Executive Director of Rebuilding Together in Pittsburgh. And we're going to dive right into that presentation after a quick round of policy updates and a few events from NHC we want to make sure you're aware of. So I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to give an appropriations update.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I'm going to touch first on fiscal year 18 appropriations because they're a little bit easier to cover. So on February 28th, President Trump is scheduled to give an address to both chambers of Congress and release a skinny budget for FY18. We're not sure what that skinny budget is going to look like, if it's just going to be top-line numbers and a few policy proposals, or it's going to be more in-depth or less in-depth. So look out for February 28th, and as for the full budget request, we've heard it's going to be released anywhere from March to June, so we really don't know when it's going to be released, but as soon as it's released, we will let you know, and we will keep tracking it and give you updates. That's FY18. For FY17, we have a little bit more information. The CR that's currently funding the government expires on April 28th, and we've heard from appropriators that they're going to start working on the appropriations bill in late March, early April, just with all the other things they have going on with all the confirmations and nominations. And so the easiest path forward for them would be to extend the current CR for another 5 months till the end of the fiscal year in September. Extending the CR is difficult for housing programs because rents are going up, and that necessitates increases to line items like project-based rental assistance, vouchers, public housing, homeless assistance programs, and to stay beneath the budget caps that were set in December of 2015? Yes, December of 2015. We're going to have to see some cuts to other programs. And if it's going to be within the housing budget, it's most likely going to come out of block grant programs and CPD programs. So we're not sure what's going to happen, but we're definitely keeping an eye on it.
This is Ethan. Let me just add a little commentary to build on Caitlin's great summary, which is entirely accurate. I will say the challenge around the CR is a very difficult one. When you look at HUD's budget in particular, 80 to 85% of it goes to keep people who are currently housed. It's renewals of existing assistance is another way to think about that. That means project-based rental assistance, mobile vouchers for people already receiving them, public housing, and some amount of homeless assistance grants, because a lot of that is going to rental assistance these days. When there is pressure to cut, the last thing members of Congress want to cut is assistance for people currently housed, because that means you're kicking someone out, and that is politically a very bad thing to do. We know, as housers, practically in a human sense, it's an awful thing, but politically it is also awful. It makes for terrible headlines. So they try and focus cuts in areas that aren't ongoing assistance for people currently being housed. The remainder of, the leftover from that 80 to 85% of HUD's budget is primarily home and CDBG. That's the lion's share of that remaining 15 to 20%. So I know a lot of Rebuilding Together's affiliates, a lot of other housers rely on those home and CDBG funds that are mostly allocated at the local level, some at the state level, to do the new projects, whether it's home renovations or creation of new housing or preservation of existing rental housing, name it. That's the growth area. That's the place where you're reaching people who haven't already been reached, and it's the most vulnerable budgetarily. So as you're thinking about and advocating around the FY 2017 budget, the current funding, and what's going to happen after April, keep in mind that the pressure to cut can very quickly go towards those programs that are particularly key for your work and for all of our work. I would give you the advice I gave to Habitat affiliates yesterday at Habitat on the Hill, and that I generally give to housers. if you're talking to members of Congress and they say, so what should I cut to fund, the thing you're talking to me about, that is not a question you need to answer. It is their job. It's not your job. Your job is to express the need from a housing perspective for the work you do and the critical role of government investments and what they do in the community and who they help and how they help. It is not your job to figure out the federal budget. So there's nothing that says it has to be a housing program, and resist the urge to say, oh, there's this other housing program I don't use, so maybe cut that. Like, just because we know it and it's sort of adjacent doesn't mean it's a logical target. Our strength in the housing field broadly will be for advocating based on both the need and the success of the solutions that we're putting forward. So, that's sort of advice you didn't ask for when you're advocating, but I think this is a pretty critical time to keep those issues in mind.
I think, to Ethan's point, the Non-Defense Discretionary United and the Campaign for Housing and Community Development funding are both circulating sign-on letters that are really a top-line approach, not specific to any program, but saying for all of these non-defense programs and for all of community and housing community development programs, we need funding. So we can send links to those sign-on letters in the notes, but I would encourage A, for you to sign on, and B, for you to share them with your network so that we can really reach as many people as possible.
Thanks for all of that information, especially the sign-on letters. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's not just about our organization signing on. It's about as many local and state organizations signing on as possible to show the breadth of the impact of these. So with that third plug on appropriations, I will move on to the other updates, which will be quick. I did want to just make sure everyone was aware that the Senate Banking Committee did confirm Dr. Ben Carson as the new HUD Secretary. There has not been a full Senate vote yet, nor have I seen it scheduled, and I'm looking at my colleagues.
No.
We do not have that information to share at this time, but we will also let you know when we know something.
And I also, just to follow up on those, we have finally seen a nomination for Ag Secretary.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Right. Former Governor Sonny Perdue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, there may be the testimony scheduled. I don't know. It certainly hasn't happened yet. But the process is he would need to testify before the Ag Committee, and then they would vote to, I assume, advance his nomination forward to the full Senate, and then you'd need a full Senate vote. So HUD's a little further along. A few, but not many of the other cabinet posts are further along. You've seen some theatrics around some of those already, including EPA, where you saw Democrats boycotting the vote, changes to the committee rules so that they could have a committee vote without a minimum number of minority party representatives in the room, and then moving it to a Senate floor vote that way. So who knows what the path is, but thus far, at least, HUD has not been quite as contentious as some of the others.
Yes, that's certainly true. But again, we will keep you posted as we learn more. I also want to make sure folks saw that on January 20th, the Trump administration suspended the FHA mortgage insurance premium cut indefinitely, and FHA has released a mortgagee letter, and we'll include the link in the notes. And my last update in terms of policy is that FHFA has proposed evaluation guidance for their underserved market plans. So this guidance, communicates FHFA's expectations about the process for developing these market plans, as well as how FHFA is going to evaluate Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I should say. And they are taking public comment until May 12th. So make sure folks are aware of that. And we are going to close out our updates with a couple NHC events, and Caitlin's going to talk to you about one of those, well, two of those.
Yeah, so yesterday we had a webinar on why housing messages backfire and what we can do about it. And so we had folks from NHC, from Enterprise Community Partners, and Frameworks Institute talk about the different messages and the different frames that people use, why they backfire, and how we can really think about changing our messaging to be more effective for the audience that we're trying to reach. So the webinar will be posted on our website shortly, and I would really encourage all of you to check it out, especially in this new environment that we're all working in, and how can we be most effective in communicating the things we care about and getting support for them. And on a similar note, our communications team is holding a conference April 27th and 28th in Minneapolis, Minnesota on solutions for housing communications. That will, if you listen to the webinar, I think that you'll find the value and really see that the conference will build upon that and take a much deeper dive, a 2-day dive instead of an hour-and-a-half dive. So I would encourage you all to check it out, and registration is open now. Early bird rates are going on now, and they will, prices will be increasing soon. So sign up early.
And just to pile on there, I would say that real strength I've heard from folks who have attended the communication convening, because we've done a couple of these now, is that it's an intensely practical series of sessions, that they're designed for communications professionals working in housing. It's not specifically aimed at advocacy, although there's some element of it there. A lot of it is around how do you connect with people's values in the communities where you're working and build community support as a way to both change and overcome community opposition to affordable housing. So think about, work in the zoning board of appeals, or work with the local permitting process, or dealing with, local environmental or traffic congestion, or whatever objection folks may raise to affordable housing in ways that really advance the work. It's around building support for local funding for affordable housing, state level funding for affordable housing. And the sessions are designed to directly empower your work. So I love policy sessions. We do all sorts of events with policy sessions. That's not what you're getting when you're going to communications convening. It is specifically focused on doing the work of communications in communities connected to the work of development and preservation of affordable housing.
We also have 2 upcoming webinars, one that Universal Service Administrative Company is hosting and we are partnering with, and yes, that's USAC. I'm sure for most of you that's an acronym you are not familiar with. They are affiliated with the Federal Communications Commission because they do the groundwork with the Lifeline Program. The Lifeline Program was recently changed in 2016 to allow a subsidy that low-income families could use for phone service to also be used for broadband, along with some other improvements to the program. So USAC will be providing a webinar focused on housing providers tomorrow at 2 p.m. And it's really a 101, so explaining the changes, explaining how the broadband piece works, but also where there are some new opportunities for housing providers. So I will share information about that after the webinar, and I really hope you're able to join that. And on February 21st, also at 2, we will have another webinar that NHC is hosting with 2 housing authorities talking about broadband, specifically their infrastructure solutions, their approaches to helping their residents get connected with equipment, with digital equipment and digital literacy. There's some really innovative things happening on the ground despite a lack of direct funding for this work. So I think there's some really helpful ideas and models that we can learn from. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John and Steve. Give us just a second to change.
Well, and while you're changing, let me just say how pleased I am that Rebuilding Together can do this presentation. We're honoring them along with Habitat for Humanity International for their work in building a spirit of volunteerism, and also connecting with the broader work of housing and community development in a number of ways. So the more I see from both organizations, the more impressed I am. John White, in particular, has been involved with NHC for several years and has been a great resource to us. So you guys are in for a treat, as am I, because I get to listen and then ask fun questions at the end. I know Rebecca's doing the handoff of the slides, and I'm going to let her open it up whenever she's ready. But really, our goal here is to give you just a bit of an introduction to their work, both at the national organization and at one of their strongest affiliates, to give you ideas and encourage discussion within the field and see where that takes us.
We're still
handing off.
We're still handing off. Apologies
no problem.
for the delay.
I can say more wonderful things about Rebuilding Together while you do that. I do think that one of the powerful reasons to think about the work built around volunteerism does connect to the advocacy discussion we were having earlier, and I'm sure John will probably talk about this a little bit, but it's a way to connect with people's values. It's a way to connect affordable housing challenges that are sometimes complicated or not immediately clear to someone who doesn't do housing all the time, with work in the communities. When you go and volunteer with one of these organizations, it gives you a new connection to both the struggles people have and the ways we can all come together to help overcome those challenges. And that's a powerful way to reach folks who can then reach policymakers. So as we're thinking about ways to connect different avenues of housing work together, I think we need to also keep an eye on how it connects to advocacy work.
Okay, so we have worked through our handoff, and I will turn it over. I believe John is going to start us off.
Well, thank you, Rebecca and Ethan, and thank you for that wonderful lead-in. I'm not sure I can live up to it, but I'll do my best. And thank you to the task force for this opportunity to share a little bit about our story. And my thought was to kind of provide folks with a overview of the work of Rebuilding Together, and then turn it over to Steve Helner-Burris, Executive Director of our Pittsburgh affiliate, who has done some absolutely wonderful work in community revitalization. Rebuilding Together is a national housing organization dedicated to safe and healthy housing. Our 145 affiliates across the country provide critical repairs to the homes of low-income homeowners and revitalize the communities in which they live. Our core work really centers around 7 principles of safe and healthy housing as determined by the National Center for Healthy Homes. In addition to following those principles, we've developed a list of 25 safe and healthy housing priorities that we take into account for every home we work on. Next year, RT will celebrate its 30th anniversary, and in that time, collectively, we have repaired and rehabilitated over 175,000 homes, and also we work on nonprofit facilities. We have utilized the help of over 3.4 million volunteers in that time and delivered over $3.7 billion in market value work. This graphic will give you a little bit of an idea of what our collective affiliate network accomplished in 2015. We're still waiting on the 2016 numbers. Annually, we repair and rehabilitate about 8,000 to 9,000 homes a year, and about 10% of that is nonprofit facilities like battered women's shelters, halfway houses, senior centers, things like that. Also, we do work in the veteran space. And each year we work with about 100,000 volunteers that come out, and they come from teams coming from real estate offices, stock brokerage firms, manufacturing concerns, local businesses, schools, civic clubs, faith-based organizations, and we try to leverage that volunteer labor as best we can to deliver these critical, safe and healthy home repairs to low-income homeowners in need. Our core business, as I said, is delivering safe and healthy home repairs. Our services are provided free of charge to the recipients we serve. The work we do is funded through private business sector, civic clubs, faith-based organizations, CDBG grants, wherever our affiliates can find the funds. Some of the populations we serve, we have a veterans program. About 10 to 15% of the 10,000 houses we do every year are for veterans of all generations, including recent Afghan, Iraq war vets. We also serve victims of disaster. In the aftermath of Hurricane Rita and Katrina, we rehabbed 1,000 homes in the Gulf. It took us 7 years to do it, but we got it done. And more recently, we rehabbed over 300 homes in the wake of Superstorm Sandy up in the New York, New Jersey area. and have assisted victims of tornadoes in Oklahoma, the flooding in Texas, and more recently the flooding that's gone on in Baton Rouge. Seniors account for almost over half of the homes we rehab on an annual basis. These are homeowners that are over the age of 65. We also serve families with children. Probably about 10 to 20% of the work we do have children living in them, and an even higher percentage. There are many homes we work on with multi-generational kids living in the home. We're also involved in the manufactured housing space and do a lot of work in the aging in place space, including a lot of home modifications. And fairly recently, we teamed up with the National Council on Aging and have developed a consumer education piece on aging safely in your home. And it's part of NCOA's Aging Mastery curriculum, and it has been great working with them. Next slide. Recently we came to the realization that as a system, we were plateauing at that 10,000 a year home repair mark for a number of years. And as you all know, the number of low-income homeowners in need of services like Rebuilding Togethers and others continues to grow. We asked ourselves, what will it take to help close that gap and make more of an impact in cities and towns across the country? And we determined that we wanted to become more of a community revitalization partner, to really become much more collaborative at the local level, much more targeted in terms of service delivery. You know, we determined that our existing business model needed to change in order to meet the demand of the growing population of low-income homeowners. Some of our affiliates had already adopted a community revitalization approach, and we wanted to take that system-wide. Affiliates across the network have been calling for us to move in this direction to help strengthen our brand, secure funding, and drive greater impact for the people we serve. And more funders are looking for organizations that work for collective impact. That led to our decision to become a much stronger community revitalization partner, to be, again, as I said, to become more collaborative, and to work with the community and other social service providers to maximize impact at the neighborhood level. Next slide. The core of CRP, or Community Revitalization Partner, lies in strategically partnering with other organizations, tapping into local planning, and ingraining ourselves in the communities and neighborhoods we serve to achieve collective impact. You know, what is a safe and healthy and thriving community? Well, it's a community that provides access to education. It's a community that provides access to jobs, a healthy environment, safe and healthy housing, a safe community. And it also provides opportunities to engage with arts and culture. Some of our affiliates across the country are doing just that, working in these areas at the community level. We do things like working on schools, interior work, landscaping, painting, accessibility improvements to senior centers, rehabbing boys and girls clubs. We do some first responder facility rehab to make communities more safe. Some of our affiliates have worked in the arts and culture area with painting murals in public spaces and things like that. Some of our affiliates, and Steve is one in particular, that have developed workforce development programs. So we're trying to be much more collaborative, branch out, make more of an impact at the neighborhood level, rather than simply just helping Mrs. Smith. Not that that's a bad thing, but we really want to do more at the community level, more targeted neighborhood level, and do it in a partnership with other housers, CDCs, our friends from Habitat, work with local area agencies on aging, work with community action agencies, folks like that. So we're really starting to target and strategically target our work. Next slide. This is just kind of a listing of how RT hopes to contribute to revitalizing a neighborhood. And, you can see, again, we want to align with local consolidated plans and the priority development areas. We want to be able to join others at the affordable housing table, focus our work in a targeted manner, bring diverse partners to the table. And it's not that we expect to lead all of the neighborhood revitalization work that's going on. We'd like to partner. We'd like to supplement and be part of. And in some cases, we'd love to lead, but we want to do so in a much more collaborative manner. So that's just a real quick overview of our kind of core business, where we want to go in terms of becoming a more community revitalization-oriented organization. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Steve Hellner-Burris with RT Pittsburgh.
Thank you, John. So thank you all for allowing us to share our story. We really adopted the model back in 2009. We really focused on how do we better serve the communities that we're in. That came partly through, I was director hired then, and my background came as a community-based organization. I had been spent 15 years building the capacity in a community in Wilkinsburg, and a lot of what we experienced in that endeavor drove the move that we made. And that endeavor was there would be a lot of people who would come in because they had a grant. They had services to provide. They would show up, and they would be there for a year or two, and then they would disappear. And folks would say, yeah, we knew they weren't going to stick around either. And so our model right from the get-go when we were talking to our board is we need to connect deeply. We need to make sure that our neighborhood model is about impact and that we are staying. So when we talk to communities, we talk about 5 to 7 year housing stabilization strategies. As we began to grow, we also knew that we needed to focus more in concert with city development plans. If our work was around stabilizing housing, we needed to be where the next wave of investments from the city were going to be coming to protect and secure the wealth for those who were already there. And so we worked closely with the city and the Urban Redevelopment Authority to identify not where they were working next week, but where were they thinking 3 and 5 years down the road so that we could go in ahead of that and focus on stabilization. We really focused on layering our funding, leveraging of state tax credit programs, foundations, deeper partners, including communities that wanted to invest. As a result of that, by 2013, our community impact, we began measuring much better. 60% increase was happening in overall block conditions where we were doing a block with 10 houses or more. Real estate values in those edge fringe communities were now jumping by 60 to 200%. That way the folks who had been living there for 20, 25 years, as the community began to change and become more stable, we wanted to make sure that the members who were there in the early days still had ability to benefit. Additionally, as a result of that, we have grown by over 500% in the last 5 years and tripled the number of projects we complete in a year. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I know some folks love numbers. So in 2009, we were a $375,000 organization. In 2016, we were a $3 million. $850,000 of that was in one of our neighborhoods. You'll see an average of 20 to 40% growth, and the units went from 40 to 165. More importantly was the investment we were making in the houses. So initially when I came, we were investing somewhere around $5,000. We did that primarily almost exclusively with volunteer labor. We had very little staff, as you'll see, but last year, we were investing over $11,000 in the house, each home we were doing. and we had 14 staff. So this community revitalization model catalyzed our growth. As you saw, we've more than doubled the numbers of houses we're serving. We're growing those investments. We also knew that telling our story was important, so we invested and improved in our video and our printed marketing materials. We added critical staff capacity, so instead of 2 people doing everything, we now have community-based project managers. We have people deeply ingrained in the communities working. Finance and grants manager to allow us to go after larger segments of funding. Federal Home Loan Bank is a recent example of that, when we were able to now bring another $450,000 into a community through that. Also knowing that the construction folks, in order to make people feel comfortable, you need to be there. So we have a full-time staff working in each of our 4 neighborhood communities. We also were spread out all over the city, so we relocated to make better use of our resources. We recognize that we have capacity limitations. So we pick, in Pittsburgh, we're a neighborhood of about 80 neighborhoods. So we've gone from 3 to 4 in the last year. We also have 3 emerging neighborhoods. Those are the ones that, as we wind up our work in one community, we're ready to move into the next to have that long-term stay and benefit. We also recognize that when we were working in those communities, our rehab for resale model was an important component. We would refix houses for owner-occupants, and there would be a vacant house, and the value of the block would not go up much. As we began renovating the ones that were empty in partnership and those got sold, we were able then to see the values of properties begin to go up in the neighborhoods. Counties around us began talking to us about, can we work with you? How can we bring your model into our neighborhood? In Hazelwood, which is the community where we've had the greatest impact and the largest amount of our funding over the last 5 years, in 2012 and 13, there were 26 properties sold, average of around $18,000 to $19,000. But by 2015, there were only 19 properties sold, but the values had gone up to an average of $35,000. In the Zone 1, where most of our work, we were up closer to 40, and that is, we do not yet have the statistics for 16, but we fully expect those numbers will go up. The 3 houses that we did last year all sold for over $60,000. We also know that it's important, if you're thinking of buying, that you want to have a home that looks good. You want to be on a block where it's not just your home looks good and everything around you. So we surveyed property conditions as an early part of our job. And on that, there were only 47 homes from a street view that looked like they were in pretty good condition. At the end of that 3rd year, we had doubled that number to 94. And so we were seeing the growth in those areas, and then that repair, what we were watching is values going up. All of a sudden, instead of us being the one who helped Mrs. Jones stay in her house where she wanted, people were recognizing that when Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh came into play and brought partners, we were seeing improved conditions and improved values. So what's the key? For us, it was connecting data to our work. Many of our funders wanted to know what's the impact. So we began by surveying, and when we work in a community, we do a street level view of the houses, and we map it. We determine how many houses. So we used to, in the early days, go to a foundation and say, would you give us $250,000 for us to do 20 houses? We now go to those same foundations and say, in Homewood, we need to do 150 homes over the next 3 years in order to impact and stabilize for existing owners. That's going to cost $4.2 million. How can you help us leverage that? We then also started working closer to the city, as I mentioned earlier. More importantly is the partnership. You know, I'm just one guy, and we have staff from different neighborhoods, but we're new to a neighborhood. We're not part of that neighborhood. We're not part of the fabric. And so in order for us to be recognized as having value, we needed to go to, there's regional models here in Pittsburgh of things like NeighborWorks that are working across multiple communities, Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. We began partnering with them and saying, not only do we need to bring our services, but we need your working with us. It does no good to build 30 homes if we're not building the pipeline of buyers from the local community. We then have moved to gentrification. It's not always bad. So part of some things that need to happen, but we can't do it at the expense of the local community. Another key ingredient was offering paid work experience to community members. There are a lot of folks who are struggling at those levels, and we said instead of just coming and volunteering one day and disappearing, so we paid them to be part of our training and work experience in the survey, and then we took them to a deeper level where they're actually working and renovating homes for their neighbor. And we have a video on our website, and on that video, one of the community members talks about, Oliver says, I used to go down to the store and sit out front and try to bum a quarter from different people over the course of the day, so by the end of the day I could buy me a pack of smokes. He said, now I spend my day helping my neighbor, seeing a real difference, helping somebody who doesn't even have what little I had. And my life, as I experience it today, has meaning. It didn't have that before. And so that's part of building that community that we thought was a key ingredient. We do not own property. Our board has made the decision that we should not be owning neighborhood properties, that our role should be working with the local CDCs in creating affordable housing options where they're doing their work. And so we partner with Hazelwood Initiative, Center of Life, organizations there. We partner with Poor Law to provide additional social services in those homes where we're working. We also in the last year started doing some commercial storefront for community gathering spaces, because in many places there is not a community gathering space, or there may be a church, but sometimes those churches and schools have a difficult time opening their doors up during the week. So we began working on that, and a lot of times that'll have residential affordable rentals above them, and so we began looking at that. Lastly, one of the things that we shared with the other Rebuilding Together affiliates is how our approach, by focusing on communities, by partnering and working, we're not going out and soliciting work. They're calling us and saying, we love that model. We love the fact that you start with existing homeowners. We love the fact that you're investing in local organizations to partner and help you open doors. We love the fact that some folks in our local community are going to be paid and trained in how to do this. And where possible, we use local suppliers and local contractors for any of the work that we pay. As a result of that, intermediaries in government, we're part of the Choice Neighborhood Program, $30 million housing project here in one neighborhood in Pittsburgh. We were the ones who went in and evaluated the first 100 homes that were owner-occupied to identify the health and safety and facade improvements needing to happen. The city then contracted under HUD to do all of the lead remediation, all of the external facade, and gave us an additional $7,500 to go into homes and be able to do internal repairs for health and safety factors above the HUD typical grant. The other thing, as mentioned earlier, was the vacant and abandoned homes, lowering property values. It also is a place where crime and blight's happening. As we began working with community police stations, community crime watches, we were identifying key properties and partnering with other local regional entities to buy up the hot spots and begin those renovations. And so that ends kind of our presentation, and I think we're going to turn it back over to you, Rebecca, and we're going to answer any questions that you have, I think.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was great. And yes, folks, please send questions through the chat box, and we will get them answered for you. While folks are thinking about their questions, I'm sure we have some here in the room. So I would love to hear more about that last point you made about working with the community policing and the hotspots. NHC has had some presentations from LISC talking about their crime prevention and the DOJ burn grant. So there's some interesting models, so I would just like to maybe if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
So we are currently working in the Homewood community, and as a part of that, working with local community organizations, Operation Better Block, Homewood Children's Village, and partnering with East Liberty Development. They did a crime study and mapped the community of the hotspots. Where were police being called? And we literally created a map. And on that, we would look and say, you know, right here is a corner where there's a lot of police calls going to, in or around here. Is there vacant property? What are the things that are drawing that? Working with then police as well as the mapping as well as community concerned citizens, we began saying, okay, well, let's board these things up, these particular homes. And East Liberty is starting to get buy options on those homes so that they are able to eliminate some of the things that are creating the hot spots. And now the next stage is there's currently 2 proposals. We're not a part of those, but 35 new housing units going in areas where over the last couple of years a lot of city property and vacant property has come back into their control, so that the community is beginning to see benefit. Crime is hopefully going to continue to go down.
Great, thanks for that. We did have a question come in from one of our attendees asking about your community partnerships and your model for developing a pipeline of home buyers within the neighborhood. Specifically, how the pipeline of home buyers can help mitigate issues related to gentrification.
So we work with NeighborWorks here in the Pittsburgh region, as well as Action Housing is another one that does some of that preparatory work. What we do is when we start working on the communities, we focus our first year as predominantly around owner occupants. But we start working with the community-based agencies saying, who do we know? Who are your long-term renters? How do we get them involved with NeighborWorks for housing counseling so that we can show them the benefit of owning? We actually are housed in the Homewood community, and we actually give our space to the NeighborWorks counselor who meets with local neighborhood residents and begins that process. I say to folks all the time, if you could create a pipeline of buyers from your local community who are ready to purchase houses, we could build as many houses as you want, and people would throw money at it right and left, because now we're stabilizing the community with those who are here versus building 25 new houses and having people move in from other parts of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, and I will say this, we have yet to find a model that has more buyers than we need.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? What sense do you have of the barrier to those new buyers? Is it folks finding the program? Is it access to credit? Is it sort of financial readiness and saving the down payment, or kind of all of the above? What's the limiting factor or limiting factors?
I would say that there's probably 3. The biggest one being kind of the credit worthiness and the preparation and the stick-to-itness of it over a typical period of 12 months to 18 months to help somebody who's struggling get to that stage, because during that time, we've seen this happen. Folks are doing well for, 6, 7, 8 months, and then a crisis occurs. And when crisis occurs for folks who are struggling, they go back to what they can do and need, so they miss an appointment because they had to take an extra babysitting job. So they're worried about survival, not about the next step. That's number one. The second thing that I think often happens is lack of information. I could never own a house anyway. It's a mindset that I think sometimes is prevalent. If I'm the first person in my family lineage who went to college. Most people in my family never thought they could go to college. I happened to marry somebody who was a college graduate who thought college education was important, and so as an example, I was able to do that. I think often folks who've never been in a ownership model, who have been in public housing, who have been in Section 8 vouchers, subsidized types of housing, don't picture that they could move from there to owning it. And then third and finally, I do think that just generally awareness of what it takes to own the house sometimes scares people, because right now if I own it and there's a water leak, I just call my landlord and hopefully someday they come and fix it. Whereas if I own it, I can't call a landlord. I have to figure out, and now I'm worried, what else is that going to take? So part of it's an education piece. Part of it is changing kind of the way people view life, I think.
Got it. Thank you.
Typically, I will add one thing. Typically, I do think what happens is I've always said it's sometimes easy to find the first 3 to 5 people, because there's always a few folks who are working at a nonprofit agency who want to invest and be in the community, or some long-term folks who say, yes, I could do that. It's past that first, what I call the easy ones, that it gets difficult, and trying to figure out where that group comes from is an important work that I think you guys could help with in terms of the National Housing Conference, trying to figure out how do we educate and get buyers ready, and is there something that could shift that?
I think that's right, and I think this is where your work really can further integrate with the work of other housers in the field. I mean, I'm glad to hear you're connected with NeighborWorks. There are, many of their affiliates. There are also folks in a number of other organizations working on building financial capacity, changing expectations and understanding, creating, frankly, credit products that help to reinforce that there are ways to combine ongoing savings and education sort of as a way to move forward. So the Family Self-Sufficiency Program within Section 8, for instance, builds in a savings component to the rental assistance along with education and asset building training, in a way to help people take those small steps along the way towards either homeownership or other self-sufficiency improvements. So yeah, I think there are a lot of good avenues to pursue here.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. I just want to thank John and Steve again for joining us today and sharing about Rebuilding Together and this community revitalization partnership model. As Ethan said, I think it's a great way to strengthen the network of housers in the community. If the folks doing the rehab and working with existing residents are plugged in with people focused on new home buyers and low-income residents in need in other communities. So glad we were able to share that today. We thank everyone for joining us, and we will give you back your afternoon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Very much.